And welcome everybody to another Nothing Like a Good Book. And particularly when it's rainy, right? Snuggled up inside. That's what we've got happening right here in Tucson at the moment. A lot of rain coming. Well, we're going to this is a most unusual book. We're going to take a personal look into Marilyn Monroe's life beyond the stage, as told by a dear friend of some 14 years. Terry Karger is her name. She's the one living person who intimately knew Marilyn Monroe and also Ronald Reagan. You know, the movie star, the singer, the sex symbol, the so-called dumb blonde, all things that Marilyn Monroe is known as, and yet her story goes far beyond that. How did she build her career in Hollywood? You know, who was she close to? Her family, her friends, her lovers, and who was really there for her? Was a successful young woman's life cut short by suicide? Or is there more to the story? Most importantly, who really was Marilyn Monroe? By Marilyn Monroe, Ronald Reagan, Hollywood and Me. Okay, My Maril. It reveals the intimate details of the star's life and the environment of Hollywood and the United States at the peak of Marilyn Monroe's career. And when you do go to markbishopmedia.com, listeners, you can see the trailer, play the trailer of the book. Very good. And it's there as well as the bios of the authors and so on. Because Terry Karger, co-author, is the granddaughter of Metro Pictures co-founder, Maxwell Karger, and the daughter of Fred Karger, Marilyn's lover and vocal coach. Bet you didn't know that. Well, co-author of Maril, New York Times best-selling author Jay Margolis. G'day, Jay. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Mate, this is very fascinating. I mean, refresh me firstly, for my listeners' sake and me. Your bestseller was again, what was the name of the book?
The Murder of Marilyn Monroe, Case Closed.
Case Closed. It's done very well for you, hasn't it?
It's a very interesting book. It's a lot of people have gravitated towards it in order to understand how Marilyn had died.
Yeah, because there's a lot of suspicion, isn't there, around that?
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
Well, this book, My Maril, which you co-wrote with Terry Karger. Terry's not the voice piece in this case. You are. So we're going to hit you with all the hard stuff. Is that okay?
I'm ready for you.
Well, begins with Terry Karger meeting Marilyn, affectionately nicknamed Maril. Maril it really is, by the Karger family for the first time as her father's new girlfriend. And she becomes Terry's babysitter and serves as a friend and sister-esque figure in the young girl's life. What was Terry's version of Marilyn then, do you think, Jay?
Well, what happened was that she was making a mud castle in front of her house, and her father was driving up in his car, and there's this woman that comes out of the car, and she just saw this woman who really wanted to gravitate towards kids and was very comfortable towards kids. However, whenever she would first meet someone, Marilyn appeared to be very shy and would be kind of cautious about meeting people because she didn't know how they were going to react to her. It looked like she had been hurt too many times before. And this was something that Terry noticed even as a 6-year-old when she first met Marilyn that one day, that spring 1948.
Well, the book is a comprehensive account of Marilyn's entire life, as well as a behind-the-scenes glance into other prominent public figures, such as Ronald Reagan, that Terry knew personally. But I want to talk about this fellow, Richard Buskin. He's New York Times best-selling author, had this to say about the book, folks. Old Hollywood, through the eyes of a child and a young woman. So when your stepmom is Jane Wyman, she was good, I used to love that show, and stepbrother is the son of Ronald Reagan, who would later become president of the United States, and surrogate mother, big sister, is Marilyn Monroe, you've got some unique memories. And Terry Karger delivers. Also, Jay Margolis states, fame never impressed Terry, and the messages Terry wants to get across are that Marilyn Monroe was intelligent, not a dumb blonde, a woman who sought and was attracted to intelligence, and was a kind-hearted, generous soul who bought gifts for those she loved, even if she was not necessarily in a financial position to do so or to buy those expensive gifts. Would that be about it in a nutshell, Jay?
Yes. In fact, some of those expensive gifts were like a $500 watch that Marilyn bought for Fred. And he said, why didn't you engrave it? And she said, well, you'll find another woman to love, and it won't have much use for you if my name was on it. And so he later ended up marrying Jane Wyman, which was interesting. Another gift that was expensive was for Nana, the grandmother of Terry, who became the mother to Marilyn for the rest of her life. And there was a gift that says, to Anne, with my deepest love and friendship, Marilyn is a 14-karat gold charm bracelet in 1953 money. Imagine how much that cost poor Marilyn. And she obviously was paying that on installments.
Right. Yes, it'd be very, very expensive today. The book, My Maril, dives deep into the side of Marilyn, revealing never-before-heard stories from Terry herself. And it also includes previously unseen photos from Terry's personal collection. And these are of Marilyn Monroe, the Karger family, and other prominent figures. And Jay also states that the book is unique in comparison to other accounts of Marilyn's life, because the book differs from the others in that, for the first time, it's a memoir of a woman, Terry Karger, who not only knew Marilyn Monroe longer than her three husbands, Jim Doherty, Joe DiMaggio, and Arthur Miller, but she first met a 21-year-old Marilyn Monroe as a 6-year-old child. So Marilyn became Terry's first and only babysitter and grew up with her until Marilyn's death at 36, so young. And Terry was 21. So unlike the other books where people knew Marilyn only for a few short years, this particular one, Terry and her family knew Marilyn for 14 years. So that's a long time, Jay.
Yes, absolutely. Almost 15 years. It really was a special time. And, she's actually the only one that's still living, Terry is, that knew her before she was famous, and then all the way up until her death, and knew her the longest still. Mm-hmm. You see, because even Marilyn's last professional photographer knew her for about 8 years, didn't even know her that long. So right. It was it's the longest friendship, and where Terry's still alive, and someone is still alive to be able to tell the tale.
Well, folks, Hermine Hilton, who is an author and memory expert, thought leader, and so on, highly respected. He has this to say: Terry Karger and Jay Margolis have written a remarkable story of her times with two of the most iconic, larger-than-life figures of the 20th century, and them being Ronald Reagan and Marilyn Monroe. And she knew them before the world did, and Terry had a glimpse of their down-to-earth humanity. So that's critic and thought leader Hermine Hilton. That's what he thinks of that. That gives you a bit of a swell there, Jay.
Yeah, I think it's Hermine Hilton's comments there are very accurate in distinguishing what's different about this book than the other Marilyn books you're going to read about. There were so many people that say, "Oh, I'm surprised, Jay, that a publisher would allow you to publish so many positive things about Marilyn Monroe." And I said, really? I said, because they wanted to see so many negative things. Yeah. I mean, kind of a chauvinistic point of view, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah, but it's very sad that people have to think that way.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Well, this book uncovers the beautiful side of Marilyn, I think. We would have to say, Jay, that My Maril, Marilyn Monroe, Ronald Reagan, Hollywood, and Me, is a personal account of the Hollywood experience, as told by a woman who grew up in it. Marilyn Monroe, she's not a one-dimensional figure. She's human like the rest of us, someone who's kind and intelligent, but also has her own struggles. Would that be fair, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. We later learned that her psychiatrist believed that she had a manic depressive disorder, bipolar. So that was something that she was struggling before they had the proper medication for that. It made her kind of hard to work with on the movie set. She was scared to death to go before the cameras, even when she was doing it all the way up until she died. In her last incomplete film, Something's Got to Give, Terry was remarking that, I could still see how she was struggling to go before the cameras. It was a fear that she never really overcame.
She covered it well, but that took a lot of guts, a lot of push to do that. Let me ask you this, Jay, as a writer. Now, were you hesitant to share personal details about Marilyn? I mean, additionally, why was it important to share her story, do you think?
I think it was important to share the story because then I began to realize that of all the, hundreds of books I've read on Marilyn and all the people I've interviewed, Terry seemed to have the most detailed, understanding of who Marilyn was. And it was something, you see, this was the family that adopted her. A lot of people before this book thought that Marilyn didn't have a family. Well, she had the Karger family. You know, the grandmother, Nana, who was born Anne Connolly, she was the mother that Marilyn could go to, could cry, have a shoulder to cry on, could mend her clothes, and always send her like 12 roses on Mother's Day, a nice card. This was her real mother, even though when Marilyn was 7, her mother was institutionalized. Right. But this woman, Anne Connolly, who had been in show business herself, she was the wife of Maxwell Karger, who started Silent Pictures, with Metro Pictures. And then when he died in 1922, Goldwyn and Mayer merged with Metro to become MGM. So, this family was not impressed with fame. So that's why Marilyn gravitated towards them, because after she became famous, these people treated her like normal people when she felt like normal was not something that was going to happen ever again. No,
not when you get up to that level. So what was your first impressions of Terry Karger and the stories that she shared in this book?
Well, I felt that she really knew Marilyn. I felt that here's a woman who I really want to write a book with. And at first she was hesitant because she said, I don't want to have people think I'm trying to profit off of knowing Marilyn Monroe. And that's why she's not doing interviews. And that's admirable take on it, and she discussed this with her stepbrother, Michael Reagan, the president's son. You see, as I mentioned before, her father, Fred, had married Jane Wyman, who had been recently divorced from Ronald Reagan. So Michael and Maureen became her stepbrother and stepsister. At that time, Michael was 7, Terry was 11, and Maureen was 11. And so this was like a whole big thing. Like her whole life is like Zelig, that Woody Allen movie where this guy walks through history. I don't want to say Forrest Gump because Terry's not dumb, No,
right.
But it's and she knew Marilyn in a very nuanced way. She said, I've read all these books, and the reason I'm writing this book is not to profit off of Marilyn, but I want people to know who she really was, and that she was not this horrible person, and that the reason she was laid on the set was not to be willful or to be nasty or to be narcissistic, but it was because she was scared about going in front of the cameras. And this is confirmed by Jane Russell herself, who I interviewed. Right. And so it's very consistent with people I've talked to. And she really knew her when so many people really didn't.
Well, in a rare, 1950 interview, she described the emotional scars of her childhood. This quote from Marilyn, "Do you know what it means to be a nobody? You have no mother or father to love and care for you. If you fall and bruise your knees or have a nightmare and wake up terrorized in the black of the night, or frightened by imaginary ghosts or monsters, or some cruel child makes fun of your clothes and shames you in front of everybody, you've got no one to go to for comfort and assurance." That's her soul speaking there.
Yes. I really am glad that I uncovered this rare interview. It's it's from True Experiences, May 1950. Hardly anybody has ever had access to it. Whenever it's online, it's like $500 to $1,000. And it's never been quoted in a Marilyn book until now, in our book, Mine with Terry. And I thought it was very important for people to really hear Marilyn speaking about this, because it shows how it scarred her to grow up without really knowing her mother, to never know her father. And through DNA evidence, we later learned that she was correct when she assumed that her father was Charles Stanley Gifford, who used to work with her mother. And so it was a very hard thing for her to get over, not having a mother and father. It's like, it makes you wonder, what is it like to really have a mom and dad, and then when she had the Karger family, she knew that this woman, Nana, was a real good mother figure to her. She loved her so much to give her that gold charm bracelet. I mean, there was just a real love there. And she wasn't going the rest of her life without the love. See, that's what this book proves, is that there was someone to come home to. And that whenever there was a problem, she would come to the Karger family for the rest of her life.
Well, you're listening to Nothing Like a Good Book with Mark Bishop, and my special guest is Jay Margolis, who's co-author with Terry Karger of this brand new book called My Maril, Marilyn Monroe, Ronald Reagan, Hollywood, and Me. So, Jay, was it difficult to decide how to order the events and people, discussed in this book? Was chronology important while organizing the book?
Oh, I thought it was a very interesting way to do it would be to, show how everybody knows like her basic story, and then to kind of, pepper in the story, the special experiences of Terry's family and her cousins, in between, so that people would see how it is relative to Marilyn's life, so that
Mm-hmm,
they wouldn't get
mm-hmm.
lost. Should have had it where you just had the stories and you didn't have the chronology. And I said, well, if you did that, you wouldn't know where everything was, in relative to like, her movie Bus Stop, or when she's doing
Yeah,
this
yeah.
and that
Mm-hmm.
and the other thing. And so when you start to put it, that's why I chose to have her making the movie pictures, throughout the book, to see what in relation each event happened, so that you could actually visualize. It's easier to
Yeah.
make a visualization of that.
Well, I was going to ask you that. How did the photos included in the book, overall enhance the story? I think it'd be pretty hard without them, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. These photos that they have are just really remarkable. And it just shows how close she was to them. And there was this false story that went out that she was smoking marijuana in this one video that was a badly VHS copy of a real film that the Karger family had, where it said that she was smoking marijuana. But there were other pictures of her with the colonel with that same cigarette. And you could tell that she's not smoking marijuana with the colonel in the room with Colonel Yeager. It's just impossible. And cousin Ben, Terry's cousin, says, I was in the room. If it was marijuana, everybody would have known about it. If she just
Right.
rolled a cigarette, that's all she did. So
Yeah, yeah. Just something else to pick on her about, I know. So why did you choose to include chapters focused on other prominent figures of the time, like Ronald Reagan, rather than just focusing on Marilyn Monroe?
Because I felt that there were a lot of people that said, well, when you're writing this book, maybe you should just stick to Marilyn Monroe. And I said, no, because that's the Ronald Reagan is part of Terry's life. When Terry was 11 years old, that's when Michael and Maureen Reagan became her stepbrother and stepsister. In fact, Michael wrote the foreword of the book suggesting that Terry should write the book to clear up the nonsense about Marilyn Monroe, and that convinced her to do it. And there were interesting anecdotes about how Terry, brought along her cousin Johnny, whose parents were having marital problems. So the Reagans allowed, Johnny to come along on these adventures. And so Johnny and Michael would have a bunk bed, and Maureen and Terry would have a bunk bed, and would stay at the Reagan ranch. And Terry even had her own goat, And well, it was funny. They'd sing 99 bottles of beer on the wall, Ronald Reagan would, in the car. And Johnny would say that Ronald Reagan would say to him, hey, Johnny, you harmonize a lot,
Yeah, right.
And Michael Reagan would get really upset sometimes. And Johnny would say, oh, everything will be just fine. Michael Reagan says, everything will work out just great. Like, he'd get all upset and just kind of hurry things along. And it was very funny how they all became close. And Johnny said that Ronald Reagan was like a fatherly figure to him when he needed that kind of attention,
Right.
during parents, having a fight.
Look, I loved her here in I think it was Laura Lee in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
Yes.
Then How to Marry a Millionaire. And she assumed Marilyn Monroe was, just a ditzy in real life, as a lot of people thought. But Maril, however, was smarter than most of her critics. And she once said, look, I don't mind if people think I'm a dumb blonde, but I dread the thought of being a dumb blonde.
Absolutely. She was wondering why people were so convinced that they thought that she was really like that in real life. She was just acting, she said. She said it's silly for people to think that you are in real life what your acting roles are.
Yeah, right. Well, here's an excerpt from the book. I can't accept the official verdict that Maril committed suicide. All the friends, now including Nana, who talked with her on Friday, August 3rd. Now, this is the day before her death. She said she was happy and she was optimistic. Now, the coroner found her stomach suspiciously empty of any residue from all the butyl capsules and chloral hydrate she supposedly swallowed. Yet, she had enough drugs in her blood to kill 3 people. Now, to many, to be an accident, as the autopsy surgeon, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, noted, right? Maril feared she would be killed. She also had a problem with drugs and alcohol, and if it wasn't suicide, and it wasn't an accident, then it had to be a homicide. A death at the hands of another human being. The killers chose a perfect murder weapon, a barbiturate overdose, that would make her death appear as a suicide or as an accident. What in your mind, Jay, what happened?
Well, what happened was that this was obviously a homicide. As you mentioned, there was not one undissolved capsule from the purported 64 pills she had supposedly swallowed. You see, the toxicology reports, as you mentioned, there was enough drugs in her blood to kill 3 people. Now, the blood had about the equivalent of 47 Nembutols and 17 chlorohydrates. But, Sidney Weinberg, who took an independent look at this autopsy from New York, he was Dr. Sidney Weinberg was very well renowned. I found this interview, a very rare interview with George Carposi Jr., who also knew Marilyn. And he interviewed Weinberg, and Weinberg said there is absolutely no way that she, orally ingested these drugs, that he would suggest that there was an injection or, a suppository. But I would say enema, because Peter Lawford's third wife, actually, Deborah Gould, said that when he was under the influence, he said, she asked him, how did Marilyn die? And he said, Marilyn took her last big enema. There was a purplish discoloration of her colon, in which the then Deputy District Attorney John Miner suggested that Marilyn had been given a drug enema. And he made this very public in many Marilyn documentaries. He oversaw the autopsy with Noguchi. In fact, I spoke with 2 people who got some private conversations with Noguchi, the autopsy surgeon. And these were Jane Mansfield's press secretary, Raymond Strait, and the daughter of Marilyn's last professional photographer, Caroline Barris. George Barris was the last professional. Caroline was his daughter. Now, Caroline and Raymond Strait, they both said that Noguchi said, I never believed it was suicide. This was always a murder. He said that I always believed that an autopsy is murder until proven otherwise. And in this instance, they said he wasn't proven otherwise. And to Caroline, Noguchi was saying, if she really was a suicide, there would be some residue of pills in her stomach, and that the pill bottles would not all have the caps put back on. It would be all over the floor. Yeah. And Noguchi told Caroline that she must have been injected.
Well, the next question is obviously, and it's hard to point at a dead man, but was it the president's men or was it somebody else?
Are you asking me who did it?
Well, it's a big who did it or who done it. So, there's always this speculation, Jay, isn't there?
Well, actually, in this instance, James Hall was from Schaefer Ambulance. And he said that he and his partner, Murray Leibowitz, was also from Schaefer Ambulance. They got to her house. They found her nude, face up on the bed with no sheet or blanket. And they took her off the bed, put a resuscitator on her. Her color was coming back. And then a gentleman in a business suit says, I'm her doctor, give her positive pressure. James Hall has positively identified this man as Maryland psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. They did a police identity sketch. And then a reporter said, hey, I know that guy. And they brought out the pictures and said, that's Ralph Greenson. And so he said that the guy pulled out a hypodermic syringe, filled it with a brownish fluid, and then injected her in the heart and then said, I'm going to pronounce her dead. You can leave. And so, Peter Lawford actually corroborated the ambulance attendants by saying the following before he died. He said, Marilyn has got to be silenced, Bobby told Greenson, or words to that effect. Greenson had thus been set up by Bobby to take care of Marilyn. People say, well, how did Greenson take care of her? The 2 attendants say with an undiluted pentobarbital injection to the heart. Now, while you could say, we can't prove this, you got 3 people out of 5 witnesses saying that it was Greenson that did it. The other 2 witnesses, James Hall said that Pat Newcomb was the one that directed him to the guest cottage. And she said, she's in there. I think she's dead. I think she's dead. And James Hall says, what's wrong with her? And she says, I think she took some pills. So that directed James Hall to smell Marilyn's mouth. He noticed no indication of vomit. There was no odor of drugs. There was no odor of pear from the chlorohydrate. It was like a little peachy, fruity smell. So he knew that she hadn't, he was very confused at that time. He's thinking, well, this woman didn't swallow these pills. And when he looked in 1982 at the autopsy, he said, what's this business about the empty stomach? He said, we thought we had seen adrenaline that had failed, but, we always notated it was a brownish fluid, and that's not adrenaline. So he got really suspicious.
Well, I don't understand why somebody hasn't taken it further. to try and do something, to rest your soul that way. But look, in the limited time we've got left, Jay, I could do this for 2 hours with you, but I've got some quick questions I want to do. You've written other books on Marilyn Monroe before. How did this one differ, just quickly, from those in terms of the topics covered or, the writing process?
I think, I'm very proud of my book with Terry, and I tell her that all the time that I talk to her. I say that this is, the real Marilyn Monroe. This is different than the other ones that I've written because it's not just focused on her death, even though there are 2 chapters at the end that do focus on her death. But the majority of it is about her beautiful life, about, a woman who really was, generally a very happy woman.
Yeah.
And at this end of her life, she, with this Life magazine article coming out the day before her death, she couldn't stop calling people about how happy she was.
Right.
Why would she kill herself the next day?
Yeah.
That's what Nana was saying to her. It doesn't make any sense. She was so happy and calling me up, and everything was going right. The studio had hired her back at a $2-picture $1 million deal. I mean, how much happier could you get?
Well, another excerpt, the last one. I wish Maril had understood her true worth, her hair, eyes, lips, and body. That was surface beauty, and that was an image. That was a role she played called Marilyn Monroe. The real Maril had an inner beauty, a sweetness, a shyness, and a tender heart towards children and animals that went so much deeper than mere sex appeal and being desirable to men. Well, what's the main idea really, Jay, that you would like your readers to take away from this book?
I'd like people to take away that Marilyn was a sweet, intelligent soul. She was not a dumb blonde. That was just something the studios were trying to, make box office hits off of. And she was someone who actually did have a family. Unbeknownst to most people who read about Marilyn Monroe, there was a family to care for her. And, Terry was almost like a daughter, even though like a little sister, but sometimes it was almost as if she were her daughter, and Terry's cousin Johnny said, I felt like her child when she hugged me when I was 7 years old and I first met her. So she really loved children. She liked children because they were innocent. They couldn't hurt her. They couldn't backstab her like the adults that were talking trash about her behind the set of the movie. And so it was, just the real Marilyn is what's to be portrayed in this book, and that's what's happened, and it's a beautiful book, and I love it.
Do you think that this book could be seen as an inspirational story, a cautionary tale, or a little bit of both, maybe?
I think it could be a cautionary tale. Just to near the end of Marilyn's life, she got involved with some characters that she probably shouldn't have. But it's also inspirational in the way that, that adopted families, are the same as real families. There's no difference.
No.
There are times when your blood relatives could be the worst thing ever. Yeah. But in this instance, she chose her family, and this was her family. May not be blood related, but that was her real family.
Yeah, it meant a lot to her. Meant the world to her. So do you plan on releasing more stories and or photos of Marilyn in the future? Why,
Actually,
or why not?
Well, and in this instance of my life, I'm working on the Robert Kennedy assassination, 2 books on that, which will reveal who really killed Robert Kennedy.
Oh, who was it? Quick.
Oh, you'll have to read the book.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear, dear, oh dear.
I got a solid case, though.
Yeah. You want to be careful, my friend. You want to be careful. They might want to silence you.
Well, hasn't happened yet.
I tell you what, it hasn't been a wonderful 10 years for journalists anyway. But listen, this is it's a nice book, and it does justice to Marilyn Monroe. Yes, she was a sex kitten. She was a... I don't think there was a man alive. I was growing up in that era, and God, she was beautiful. And I'll never forget that. I sometimes used to think she was ditzy. That drove me a bit nuts, but I loved her. I loved her kindness and her innocence, and that famous shot above the old air vent. Boy, did that become famous.
Well, absolutely. It was it's wonderful. And see, what Terry's family noticed was that she must have really been acting, because she could turn off that sort of, what they called the dumb blonde role and be who she really was.
Right.
And she didn't have that breathy voice, and that was just for show. And that's how good of an actor she was, said Terry's cousin Ben.
Amazing. Well, the book, My Maril, M-A-R-I-L, My Maril, Marilyn Monroe, Ronald Reagan, Hollywood, and me. And is written by Terry Karger and Jay Margolis, who is the, award-winning journalist from his very, very first book. And there's going to be more coming. So I wish you well, my friend. I think on this one that Terry Karger and Jay Margolis really clear up any misconceptions and false information about Marilyn. And I think they reveal the true story of Marilyn Monroe's life. And I think I think she deserves that. So you've done a wonderful job.
Thank you.
All right, my friend. Lovely speaking with you. And stay in touch. Then we'll get hold of the Kennedy one. Okay.
Oh yeah. Likewise. I'll get back on your show for that time.
All right. Thank you. Nice speaking with you, Jay. Bye for now.
All right. Bye bye.
Jay Margolis, ladies and gentlemen, in Nothing Like a Good Book. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And by all means, send me an email to mark@markbishopmedia.com if you think that a book deserves a little bit of, investigating into. By all means, let me know. And I'll see you again soon.